a coat and breeches and a waistcoat and a long shirt. It was just the way it was. Today we're allowing some folks not to have all that heavy stuff on because I got to tell you, I'm almost like water right now. So we're going to take care of them. So welcome to America's 250th. Who would have thunk it, right?
Yeah.
So I'm glad you folks came out here to actually hear the document, the Declaration itself. Just so people know, historically, the 4th is when the document itself was adopted. Independence was adopted on July 2nd. So we're already 2 days late for this celebration. Yay! Right? But the Declaration itself is what everybody remembers. So we're going to be reading that in its entirety. It's not just about taxation, folks. There's a lot of things in there. Declaration of causes that led them to independence. But what you're also going to hear are some selections of different readings from people who lived in that time period and had a lot of influence over what happened. Guys like John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Patrick Henry. But you're also going to hear from some ladies. So they were involved too in different ways. They may not have been in the Congress and making the Declaration and resolving on it, but boy did they have influence. So we're going to hear about that too. So without further ado, let's start with our first reading, and that will set it up. Now everybody thinks independence was coming and it was inevitable. Well, it wasn't. In fact, most of the time, right up to the Declaration of Independence itself, most people just wanted a reconciliation with Great Britain. They wanted the rights of Englishmen. They were here under English rule, whether they were German or Dutch out here or anything else, Scots-Irish. They just wanted to be part of the Great Britain and its empire, but they wanted rights. That's what the first about a year and a half of the war was really about. But some of the people who thought independence was something we should be shooting for weren't necessarily men. There were women, and we're going to hear about a Tea Party, kind of like an anti-Tea Party, that happened well before the Declaration of Independence.
Good afternoon. I am here on behalf of Penelope Barker and the 50 other ladies that she gathered together for the Edenton Tea Party that took place in Edenton, North Carolina. This is an extract of the letter that her group composed. It's dated October 27th, 1774, and it actually made its way across to England and was put in the Morning Chronicle and London Advertiser on January 16th, 1775. The provincial deputies of North Carolina, having resolved not to drink any more tea, nor wear any more British cloth, etc., many ladies of this province have determined to give a memorable proof of their patriotism and have accordingly entered into the following honorable and spirited association. And I send it to you to show your fair countrywomen how zealously and faithfully American ladies follow the laudable example of their husbands, and what opposition your ministers may expect to receive from a people thus firmly united against them. As we cannot be indifferent on any occasion that appears nearly to affect the peace and happiness of our country, and as it has thought necessary for the public good to enter into several particular resolves, by a meeting of the members deputed from the whole province, it is a duty which we owe not only to our near and dear connections who have concurred in them, but to ourselves who are essentially interested in their welfare, to do everything as far lies in our power to testify our sincere adherence to the same. And we do therefore accordingly subscribe this paper as a witness of our fixed intention and solemn determination to do so. And I would like to just add that these names were all written on this document, and unlike the Boston Tea Party, where the men who were involved in dumping all of those crates of tea into the Boston Harbor were in disguise, not a single one of these ladies wore any sort of disguise, and their lives were in jeopardy just as much as the men.
Of course, when this petition ended up in England, people saw it and wrote about it, especially relatives of one of the ladies that signed that. So here is the response to that from someone in England.
Arthur Iredell, from his home in London, wrote the following letter to his brother in North Carolina, who was a relative by marriage of one of the signers, Elizabeth Johnston. I see by the papers the Edenton ladies have signalized themselves by their protest against tea drinking. The name of Johnston I see among them. Are any of my sister's relatives patriotic? I hope not, for we English are afraid of the male Congress. But if the ladies should attack us, the most fatal consequences are to be dreaded. So dexterous in the handling of a dart, each wound they give is mortal, while we, so unhappily formed by nature, the more we strive to conquer them, the more we are conquered. The Edenton ladies, conscious of this superiority on their side by former experiences, are willing to crush us into atoms by their omnipotency. The only security on our side to prevent impending ruin is the probability that there are few places in America which possessed so much female artillery as Edenton.
Our next reading is a little bit more familiar, at least a quote from it, but we like to put things more in context. So we're not just going to say the quote, you're going to hear more about a speech that Patrick Henry made in the Virginia House. This is just before Lexington had conquered.
Portion of Patrick Henry's speech in the Virginia Convention, March 23rd, 1775. Sir, we have done everything that could be done to avert the storm that is now coming on. We have petitioned, we have remonstrated, we have supplicated, we have prostrated ourselves before the throne and have implored its interposition to arrest the tyrannical hands of the ministry and parliament. Our petitions have been slighted. Our remonstrances have produced additional violence and insult. Our supplications have been disregarded. We have been spurned with contempt from the foot of the throne. In vain, after these things, may we indulge the fond hope of peace and reconciliation. There is no longer any room for hope. If we wish to be free, if we mean to preserve inviolate those inestimable privileges for which we have been so long contending, if we mean not basely to abandon the noble struggle in which we have been so long engaged, in which we have pledged ourselves never to abandon until the glorious object of our contest shall be obtained, we must fight. I repeat it, sir. We must fight. An appeal to arms and to the God of hosts is all that is left to us. They tell us, sir, that we are weak, unable to cope with so formidable an adversary. But when will we be stronger? Will it be next week or next year? Will it be when we are totally disarmed And when a British guard shall be stationed in every house, shall we gather strength by irresolution and inaction? Shall we acquire the means of effective resistance by lying supinely on our backs and hugging the delusive phantom of hope until our enemies shall have bound us hand and foot? Sir, we are not weak. If we make a proper use of those means which the God of nature hath placed in our power, 3 millions of people armed in the holy name of liberty, and in such a country as that which we possess, are invincible by any force which our enemy can send against us. Besides, sir, we have no election. If we were base enough to desire it, it is now too late to retire from the contest. There is no retreat but in submission and slavery. Our chains are forged. Their clanking may be heard on the plains of Boston. The war is inevitable, and let it come. I repeat, sir, let it come. In vain, it is in vain, sir, to extenuate the matter. Gentlemen may cry, peace, peace, but there is no peace. The war is actually begun. The next gale that sweeps from the north will bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here idle? What is it that gentlemen wish? What would they have? Is life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death.
So you'll hear us say huzzah. Feel free to just shout it right out. That's what we do in the 18th century instead of hooray. It's also what the British use for bayonet charges too, so I'm just letting you know. We're not going to see any of that today. So our next speaker, now through 1775, we had Lexington and Concord. This is after Patrick Henry's speech. We had Bunker Hill, which is really Breed's Hill, and then there was a siege of Boston. Our next speaker lived through that siege, saw what the British did while they were there, but it's not her. Sorry, our the next speaker. Getting a little out of order. Our next speaker is it's going to come from Thomas Paine. Now, one of the things that after Lexington and Concord, like I said, Boston was under siege. And one of the things that really had to happen was that somebody, Benjamin Franklin, thought he had picked the right person, and we might agree with that one. Somebody had to actually take all these ideals that were happening out there, that people were talking about, and make it easily digestible for the average person that doesn't have a lot of education. So that man was Thomas Paine and Common Sense.
This is from Common Sense, January 1776. The sun never shined on a cause of greater worth. 'Tis not the affair of a city, a county, a province, or a kingdom, but of a continent, of at least 1/8 part of the habitable globe. 'Tis not the concern of a day, a year, or an age. Posterity are virtually involved in this contest, and will be more or less affected, even to the end of time, by the proceedings now. Now is the seed time of continental union, faith, and honor.
Now we're going to talk about the next speaker. I just wanted to see my wife up here a little sooner, right? That's really what it was. Adopted yet. So after July 2nd, when Congress adopted independence, he had some things to say about how the country was going to celebrate, except he got the wrong date right. So here we go, John Adams.
The other thing I wanted to add too was John Adams and Abigail Adams wrote a combined over 1,000 letters to each other during this time. And so this is one of those letters that he wrote to her. And this was lettered on July 3rd, 1776. On the second day of July, 1776, will be the most memorable epoch in the history of America. I am apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the greatest anniversary festival. It ought to be commemorated as a day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of this continent to the other, from this time forward, forevermore. You will think me transported with enthusiasm, but I am not. I am well aware of the toil and blood and treasure that it will cost us to maintain this declaration and support and defend these states. Yet, through all the gloom, I see the rays of ravishing light and glory. I can see that the end is more than worth all the means, and that posterity will triumph on that day's transactions.
Huzzah!
Huzzah.
When Thomas Jefferson wrote the first draft of the Declaration, he had to kind of have two really important people watching over his shoulder and criticizing him. And that would be Ben Franklin and John Adams. Imagine being in a room with those two and trying to write a document that expresses everything that's going on at the time and the reason for this independence. So these are mostly his words. In Congress, July 4th, 1776, a declaration of the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government, and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time, after such dissolutions, to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally their forms of governments, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is, at this time, transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy, scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native connections and their native justice and magnanimity,
and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Signed by order and in behalf of the Congress, John Hancock, President. Hip, hip!
Huzzah!
Hip, hip!
Huzzah!
Hip, hip!
Huzzah!
Of course, declaring independence and winning it were two completely different things. There was great uncertainty by everyone about what this really meant. But the fact was clear. The path was now clear about what at least leaders intended, and many people now were about to follow them. The problem is, as Boston is evacuated in 1776, in St. Patrick's Day, they eventually go to New York City and they drive Washington's army out. And they go across New Jersey and into Pennsylvania. And it's at that time, in December of 1776, things looked about as bleak as any time during the war. Now, this war lasted for 7 years. This was about as bleak as it got. Men who were dwindling by the day in camp as Washington's wondering what he's going to do to replace them. And what he could possibly do to raise spirits. It's at this time of December, he turns to Thomas Paine again, who is on this campaign, and at night, as he's stopping, he's on a drumhead writing out what eventually became known as the American Crisis. So here's Thomas Paine again with a very famous excerpt.
December 19th, 1776. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country, but he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It is dearness only that gives everything its value. Heaven knows how to put a proper price upon the goods, and it would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated.
Huzzah!
Huzzah!
The war was obviously difficult. We know this. Hindsight's 20/20. Imagine putting yourselves into the shoes of people after the Declaration, and finally, what followed after when Thomas Paine was writing the crisis was Trenton, Princeton. Raise spirits up. There was a long war to go. Saratoga, Yorktown, all sorts of battles and encounters in between. And out here, people lost just about everything they had. There was very few people that didn't have their farms destroyed, their livelihoods destroyed, friends, neighbors, family who were killed. it was a high price for freedom. And after the war ended, later on, there were some who participated in what happened with the Declaration and the war itself that had a lot to say about what it all meant. And one of them was Benjamin Rush. He was the personal physician to John Adams. In fact, he got to know a lot of the people who were in the Independence Hall making out the Declaration of Independence or supporting it. He's got some pretty interesting thoughts about what it all meant. So here is Benjamin Rush.
Letter from Benjamin Rush to John Adams, August 2nd, 1811. Dear old friend, the 4th of July has been celebrated in Philadelphia in the manner I expected. The military men, and particularly one of them, ran away with all the glory of the day. Scarcely a word was said of the solitude and labors and fears and sorrows and sleepless nights of the men who projected, proposed, defended, and subscribed the Declaration of Independence. Do you recollect your memorable speech upon the day on which the vote was taken? Do you recollect the pensive and awful silence which pervaded the House when we were called up, one after another, to the table of the President of Congress to subscribe what was believed by many at the time to be our own death warrants? The silence and the gloom of the morning were interrupted, I well recollect, only for a moment by Colonel Harrison of Virginia, who said to Mr. Elbridge Gerry at the table, "I shall have a great advantage over you, Mr. Gerry, when we are all hung for what we are now doing. From the size and weight of my body, I shall die in a few minutes. But from the lightness of your body, you will dance in the air for an hour or two before you are dead." This speech procured a transient smile, but it was soon succeeded by the solemnity with which the whole business was conducted. Let us, my dear friend, console ourselves for the unsuccessful efforts of our lives to serve our fellow creatures by recollecting that we have aimed well.
Huzzah.
So we're about to hear from the man himself who wrote the Declaration, the first draft, and of course cringed in the corner when everybody was criticizing it. But we're going to hear from Thomas Jefferson, not long before his death. Most of you probably know that John Adams and Thomas Jefferson died on July 4th, 1826, 50th anniversary of the Declaration. Miles apart, of course. Neither one of them knew that the other had died. But here's Thomas Jefferson with his recollection about how he put together the Declaration.
Thomas Jefferson to Henry Lee Monticello, May 8th, 1825. With respect to our rights and the acts of the British government contravening those rights, there was but one opinion on this side of the water. All American Whigs thought alike on these subjects. When forced, therefore, to resort to arms for redress, an appeal to the tribunal of the world was deemed proper for our justification. This was the object of the Declaration of Independence, not to find out new principles or new arguments never before thought of, not merely to say things which was never said before, but to place before mankind the common sense of the subject in terms so plain and firm as to command their assent, and to justify ourselves in the independent stand we are compelled to take, neither aiming at originality of principle or sentiment, not yet copied from any particular or previous writing, It was intended to be an expression of the American mind and to give that expression the proper tone and spirit called for by the occasion.
Huzzah.
So before I have the last reading, I just want to ensure that right after that, we're going to do a flag switching ceremony. We're going to go ahead about a year, and we are going to switch from the Grand Union flag, which was the flag that most troops were under during this time in 1776. It's known as the Continental flag sometimes. And we're going to switch that with the Stars and Stripes, and we'll explain when that goes in. Also afterward, we're going to have a tavern underneath the tent all the way at the end of the road. It should be a lot of fun. It's very family friendly. There's no alcohol down there. Sorry. But we may act like it with the heat, right? But we have some beer of root. You can figure what that is, right? But we have some toast from the period, and everybody's going to be able to participate with that. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So with that said, the excerpt I have here is an anonymous sergeant done many years, many decades after the Revolution, but he lived through it. And what he's talking about is the time between Trenton and Princeton. And it kind of sums up the spirit of the American soldier, not just then, but also now. 3 days after the victory at Trenton, the American Army recrossed the Delaware into New Jersey. At this time, our troops were in a destitute and deplorable condition. The horses attached to our cannon were without shoes, and when passing over the ice, they would slide in every direction, and could advance only by the assistance of the soldiers. Our men, too, were without shoes or other comfortable clothing, and as traces of our march towards Princeton, the ground was literally marked with the blood of the soldiers' feet. Though my feet did not bleed, they were so sore that their condition was little better. While we were at Trenton, on the last of December, 1776, the time for which I and most of my regiment had expired. At this trying time, General Washington, having now but a little handful of men, and many of them new recruits in which he could place but little confidence, ordered our regiment to be paraded and personally addressed us, urging that we should stay a month longer. He alluded to our recent victory at Trenton, told us that our services were greatly needed, and that we could now do more for our country than we ever could at any future period, and in the most affectionate manner entreated us to stay. The drums beat for volunteers, but not a man turned out. The soldiers, worn down with fatigue and privations, had their hearts fixed on home and the comforts of the domestic circle. It was hard to forego the anticipated pleasures of the society of their dearest friends. The general wheeled his horse about, rode in front of the regiment, and addressing us again, said, "My brave fellows, you have done all I asked you to do and more than could be reasonably expected. But your country is at stake, your wives, your houses, and all that you hold dear. You have worn yourselves out with fatigues and hardships, but we know not how to spare you. If you will consent to stay only 1 month longer, you will render that service to the cause of liberty and to your country, which you probably never can do under any other circumstance." A few stepped forth, and their example was immediately followed by nearly all who were fit for duty in the regiment, amounting to about 200 volunteers. An officer inquired of the general if these men should be enrolled. He replied, "No. Men who will volunteer in such a case as this need no enrollment to keep them to their duty." And as a note, half of those who stepped forward and volunteered died as a result of Princeton. So they sacrificed by volunteering to fight for this country. So that tells us a lot about the men then, and also an awful lot about the men and women today in today's armed forces who are out there defending us so that we can do things like this today, right? So thank you very much. Let me explain what's happening with the flag switching ceremony. If you look at the second flagpole, that's wooden, it's white. Up top is what the Grand Union or Continental colors are. again, this is what was flying over encampments for the most part, mostly, before we had a national flag. So what we're going to do is symbolically change from colonies to states by replacing that flag with the stars and stripes. Now, Congress had the resolution June 14th, 1777, about what flag this should be. It was not exactly detailed. All it said was alternating red and white stripes, and then a field of blue in the canton, which is in the upper left-hand corner. It's a quarter of the flag, with a new constellation. There's no standardized anything back then. So throughout the war, you had different number of alternating stripes, 15 or more, different colors. Blue was added sometimes. And then the stars in the field could be almost anything. So what we have up, or going to be putting up, is one that is attributed to Betsy Ross. Thank you very much. Very much power. Very rare treat. Hope you enjoyed it. Everybody join us in the tent. It'll be a little cool like up here, except you'll get a cold drink, and it's going to be fun. Join us down there. We'll be there in moments.
And that's going to do it for today's vlog. We're going to end the vlog with a little KFC. Haven't had KFC in a couple of years now. So we got the family bucket, some sides and such. Yes, that is the Supergirl logo there. That's in the movie theaters. But yeah, that's going to do it for today. This vlog was a two-parter. Yep, it was long. But I think we captured some good stuff, some history, some knowledgeable stuff. And I hope to see you in the next video. Take care. See you next vlog. Vlog over. Bonus footage. I thought maybe you would like to see what it looked like outside the box or carton. I got the specialty fries the special recipe fries. We got some mac and cheese, which used to be like the famous thing of KFC, the mac and cheese. And then mashed potatoes and gravy. And we got a drumstick, I think 3 drumsticks. And their butter biscuits that just melt in your mouth. As you can see, they're falling apart already, just taking them out. But that's KFC for you.